And it's so lovely to see you all. I have spoken a number of times in my days, but it's just inevitable that I struggle with anxiety the weeks before. And something that a friend recommended this time was to start praying for you specifically in the weeks beforehand. And so it's so lovely to see your faces of these people I've been praying for. And truly it was so helpful to sort of get the talk and the conversation off of me and onto, no, I want to pray for you, and that this time would be a place of rest and refreshment for your soul. No, I love all the noises. So a lot of what I'm going to be doing this morning is simply reading from this book called Stretch Marks I Wasn't Expecting. And I've found, speaking to groups of women and young moms, that they love to be read to, because so often we're the ones reading to little ones. But if you would prefer to simply follow along and have a copy, then feel free. There's a stack up here. Or if you just want to sit back and relax, I will read to you. So I come from Savannah. Susan's a dear friend. I'm from Christchurch Anglican. There's a big crew of us up here. My husband and I run a retreat center there called Wesley Gardens Retreat. And I have 3 little ones, 2 biological, 1 adopted from India. And you'll hear a bit more of this in the chapter, but I spent a good chunk of my 20s traveling in Africa and China and just spending time doing missions in a traditional sense. And now the Lord, I'm 38, has had me through much of this decade doing motherhood in the traditional sense. And I feel like so much of my journey has been, okay, what do those look like? What does the marriage of missions and motherhood when I feel stuck a lot of days, or just under a different sort of paradigm than what I was used to in my 20s doing missions. And so that's a lot of what this book is unpacking, is just my journey of different seasons of life and how missions sort of ebbs and flows, and listening to where the Lord would have us in each of those distinct seasons has played out for me. So you can just relax and sit back. Does anyone want a book to look through and know?
Sure, I will.
Yeah?
Does anybody? I can hand them out. Anybody want one?
And these are in the bookstore too, if you feel like you connect at some level with them. And I said on the, I was going to say blackboard, that shows you my age, but whiteboard, if money is at all an issue for you and your reasoning for not buying the book, please, you don't even have to ask me, but please just take a copy. Do not let money be the reason that you don't buy it if you feel like you connect with it. So I'm going to be on page 126. This is a chapter called Belonging. I suppose it's not that I don't have the time or energy to write at this point. I just don't know what I would say. The journal listened sympathetically. My life feels predominantly little. I'm with little ones most hours of most days. At some point in my life, I felt successful because I made straight A's or won a tennis tournament. At another, because I had a date or finished a marathon. Currently, I feel successful because my daughter got half her poop in the toilet. Are you saying your life feels little right now? A quiet voice within me queried. I don't think so. Maybe. I guess so. Okay, yes. My days can feel little in the sense of significance. Little in the sense of how much is happening aside from potty training and repetitions of ba. But I know better. I know that mothering is a phenomenal form of discipleship. I know that little ones are a primary path to the kingdom and of matchless priority to Jesus. It doesn't sound like you feel that way, though. The quiet voice gently searched again. No, you're right. I don't usually feel that way. Instead, I feel like an hour alone at Kroger staring at cheese options would be comparable to a vacation in Hawaii. Success apparently takes on new definitions with new seasons, and God has me in a new season. There's a saying, sometimes attributed to Mother Teresa: if you want to bring happiness to the whole world, go home and love your family. Part of me gives a hearty amen to this. Part of me resists it. It's hard not to rate this season as less fruitful than seasons past, where productivity felt high or relational impact wide. It's hard to deem my days successful or justify how a ministry that fits into a crib is fruitful. Part of me is not wanting to surrender to where God has me, still wanting the free-spirited, nose-studded single life that travels and hikes and writes in coffee shops. Not the one who's usually at home in sweatpants doing laundry, trying to cook an edible meal, or kiss a hut knee. Part of me struggles to know these roles as holy, as worship. One of the few imperatives Scripture speaks about children is that they're a blessing. Culture doesn't tend to view them this way. It's the nose-studded traveler living the high life with utmost freedom that they esteem. Or the woman who's figured out how to balance full-time motherhood with a full-time job, with full-time roles on the PTA and Girl Scout and City Council boards. What about staying home with my children? Can that be enough? A means to communion with Christ even? Can the Trinity really be present, speaking and sanctifying and glorifying in a diaper change? Or repetitions of Ba? Being a stay-at-home mom runs deep in my story. Before societal or parental or theological voices shared their views, it was my dream. A boisterous dinner table, tucking love notes into lunchboxes felt like part of my design, part of myself that I someday hoped to meet. And as I field my 17th request for crackers at 8:40 a.m., I realize I'm meeting her. My son coos beside me. My daughter's entrenched in the coloring book, and I stalk Instagram while Pans wait patiently on the counter. In some ways, the stay-at-home mom is just who I envisioned, satisfying, engaged, and alive. And in other ways, she's not. Her days are more busy and mundane than I envisioned, more simple and somehow chaotic, running a jagged course I never knew possible, with meaningful highs and naked lows. I've started to wonder, is being a stay-at-home mom enough? Is just being at home with my children today satisfactory? If so, why the tension? And how did just enter the conversation? No one says I'm just a teacher or just a doctor. Women aren't expected to stay at home anymore. It's not the norm to just be a mother. Even for us stay-at-home moms, and even when finances don't deem necessary, there's a pull toward also being an essential oils rep or writing a cookbook or creating a blog that influenced the masses. Who are the masses anyway? I reflect on my grandmothers, both versions of June Cleaver in my memories, draped with an apron, jotting a thank you note for the potluck last week. Did these women have layers beneath? What did they worry about or talk about on play dates? Did they ever feel teased by unavailable pursuits, wrestle with their job at home not being enough? Or I think about my own mother, remembering how I watched her reflection in the mirror, diagonal strokes, blushing her subtle cheekbones before the babysitter arrived. How much will be enough to gain mommy's delight, I wondered. Through adolescence and into adulthood, journal entries repeated a variation. Will I ever be enough to capture a man's affection? Am I enough, God, to capture your attention? With 2 down for naps and an empty page before me, I'm still pondering enough. When will it be satisfied? And why does it so quickly lead as my barometer of lacking peace? If I read them a bedtime story, or the red bump on her eye goes away, if he doesn't roll off the bed again, or if I check off exercise, clean, and cook, and maintain joy amidst meltdowns, enthusiasm toward afternoon boredom, then have I done enough? If Micah, my husband, comes home to savory aromas in a well-behaved household, have I done my job well? The voice of enough tells me no. No, there is yet more, always. That was kind of you to remember her birthday, but why not write a letter instead of just an email? I'm glad you found the deal on salmon, but how about finding a coupon for the other 10 things too? You should at least have time to steam mop and bake muffins for the neighbors across the street. Oh, and you missed a spot when shaving your legs this morning. And when you finish these, come back. I always have more to offer. Clearly enough will never be satisfied. Should it remain my barometer, I will never know peace. Sometimes I think my enough questions are about guilt. There's a story in John 8 where Jesus is teaching in the temple. Some studied religious folks bring him a woman who cheated on her husband. Angrily pushing her through the crowds, they yell, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say?" Jesus knelt down, starts writing on the ground with his finger. They kept badgering him for an answer. He replies, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." One by one they walk away until it is just Jesus and the woman. He asks her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She says, "No one, Lord." So he says to her, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more." We don't know what Jesus scribed in the sand, but it alludes to words that knock the breath out of this woman's shame, and rightfully shamed the arrogance of those breathing down her throat. It alludes to guilt, forgiving guilt and telling guilt it has no place anymore. I also think my enough questions can be about boredom. A therapist once defined boredom to me as an inability to enjoy oneself. When I'm enjoying myself, the self that God has thoughtfully given to me, I feel free. I feel awake and alive. I feel honored to be a mother who gets to spend full days at home with her children. I feel free to be a mother who in a given day does this or doesn't do this, but gets to be with her children. My thoughts drift to the lovely lines read at many wedding ceremonies, the ones about love being patient and kind, not envying or boasting, not arrogant or rude, the ones about love not insisting on its own way, not being irritable or resentful, not rejoicing at wrongdoing, but rejoicing with the truth, bearing all things, believing all things, hoping all things, enduring all things. I dare say they're some of the most illuminating and challenging words of the entire Bible. My soul ain't feeling lovely, though. Rather frustrated, pitiable, weighed down by resentment. I don't want to run simply because my season is hard, though, or scramble to find relief simply because I fear missing out or misery within. How did you endure, Jesus? How did you not doubt your significance when you were weary? Your calling, Lord, in the midnight hours. You are a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. You labored to the utmost, nail marks puncturing your sweating palms, stabbing accusations and stretching horrific holes through your extremities, marks through your fragile limbs. John 15 comes to mind, where Jesus says, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing." Maybe abiding in Jesus is our greatest goal as moms. Maybe it's our barometer for success. And maybe our scope of mothering is too narrow, too tied to the severing of an umbilical cord. Maybe femininity and motherhood, being and becoming a woman, maybe these branches don't fit into a crib, aren't supposed to fit into a crib. Maybe they are vast and brilliantly complex, growing beyond a definable space. In the words of Ann Voskamp, maybe motherhood is a calling to come closer, not a command to be more. I learned as a single person that motherhood is wider than biology. Late to the altar, I had considered that maybe I was called instead to the celibate life as a missionary in Africa. I wrote a book about this even, but I'm still trying to believe it's true. Paul shares a radical theology of parenting, spiritual parenting, where going and making disciples transcends marriage and sex and babies. Likewise, Jesus emphasizes God as our ultimate parent and a kingdom family, primary to the nuclear one.
And it's 15 minutes.
Perfect.
I don't know if you want to stop there or keep going.
we'll stop there. So you can read the rest later if you like.
But now it's like talking.
Yeah. So those who came in late, if you missed it, if you want a copy of the book, they're down in the bookstore. That's simply what we've been doing, is reading from a chapter in this book on motherhood and mission. And if finance is the reason that are preventing you from taking a book, please tell that voice no and feel free to help yourself. But I have some questions that I could throw out here. But first, I just want to see if anything from those pages prompted things on your heart that you're curious about or that hit home with you. There's a lot of mamas in here, and grandmas. I'm so excited too.
I like the image of rather than being confined in a crib, that has far-reaching expanding possibilities. Like, beautiful. If you think about each child, we're making disciples within our family first. That we can pray about their horizons and their futures, our faithfulness in this season. Has boundaries we'll never see. But we're making a difference. Well, it looks small. But really.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think as I mentioned spending time in prayer for each of you before this, and it led me to pray for my children, and a lot on that theme that you're talking about of the crib and how you can feel confined in motherhood. The mission field feels confined somehow. And I found that the most empathetic voice for me in that was Jesus. Interestingly, as a single and not a biological parent, but thinking, Jesus, did it ever feel like 3 or 12 was confined somehow? Couldn't you have come when there was like technology and you could have tweeted something to 7 million? But no, for some reason you came, and it was this very particular calling to these particular souls who were wired in various ways and various vocations. But that gives me such hope that our Savior himself, who had endless capacity to reach endless places on the earth, there was a distinctness to his crib, if you will, it being such a different vision. So thanks for sharing that. Yes, Claudia.
Well, I'm just going to comment that, in listening yesterday to Simon and this afternoon, and then this morning to Michelle, I think it was, on the garden, both of them emphasize that it's about the relationship and your people right now happen to be primarily your little ones, which I think is
Yes.
exactly what God's supposed to be.
Let me say this real quick because I'll forget. My memory's like this. I think something too, Claudia, that now looking back at seasons of singleness for myself and for girlfriends, I feel like we as the church, capital C, need to grow in affirming single women's calling too. That again, this is not a biological thing per se. It's more about femininity and becoming women made in God's image, and that there's a motherhood element there that isn't just about growing in your belly. And I've told some friends this, but were I to reprint this or rewrite it, I wouldn't have put a pregnant woman on the front, and I don't know that I would have titled it this either, because I think I narrowed it myself to a very women with young babies, and I feel like there's so much more that we're talking about here about what it means to be a woman made in God's image, mothering the children that he puts in our path.
I think that's your next book.